I'm going to quickly going to demonstrate that. You can imagine it's very easy. You just need flour and water. If you start from scratch, I would use relatively fresh flour. How do you know that? You could buy grains and then mill them in a hand mill or in an electric mill, or even in your Vitamix. Just make sure that you know that your Vitamix will have like a little bit of dull blades if you keep on making flour in your Vitamix. So because grains are so hard, you will probably need to replace your blade quicker. But you could start, and I would really use freshly milled flour. If you can't get freshly milled one, maybe get like from bulk from a local mill or anything that it's not like it has not been sitting in the shelf for like a year or so before it gets to your kitchen. So I use a little bit of rye. I milled some rye flour this morning, so it's really nice. It's super fresh. And the freshness means that it's full of enzymes and microorganisms that are very active and are going to be producing a very active starter, hopefully. So you never know, when you do your own starter culture from scratch, you never really know what's happening because you're basically doing a spontaneous fermentation. And with all spontaneous fermentations, you don't know exactly what's happening because nature takes over. So in this case, I use freshly milled rye flour, and I'm going to rely that the microorganisms and the enzymes in this flour are there. They are not dead. This flour has not been, or this grain has not been treated with pesticides or herbicides. It's an organic grain, so you ideally would like to look for that because you want the best grain that you can really get for your starter. I'm going to use about 150 grams. Again, you might want to use a scale for that. If you can't use a scale, you can also use a cup. Of course, you can just kind of at this stage, it's not super important to get like the exact amount of flour and water. At this stage, you really just want to get the culture going. So you could also use a cup measure, and you just use about equal amounts of flour and water. Still, because I'm used to having a scale, I'm gonna do that. I mix together flour and water in equal amounts. And at this point, I'm going to actually use a whisk to really bring these two together. And I also want to bring some oxygen into my flour-water mix. And so I'm actually quite vigorous here at this point. I'm mixing this very well together. A whisk is really great for that. So what I'm doing now is I'll just kind of clean up the sides of the bowl a little bit. I cover it with a kitchen towel, and I just wait for nature to take over now. So when you start stirring water and flour together, there's always going to be a fermentation happening, unless your water is really off, is really heavy, there's something wrong with the water, or unless your grain is really old or maybe treated with some pesticides or fungicides that really inhibit the growth of the microorganisms. So if nothing happens with when you stir water and flour together, it's like no fermentation happening, then there might be something wrong with your flour, or your flour is too old. And I would either start with a fresh flour, with a really freshly milled flour, maybe with a local flour, or with like some grains that you do yourself, and just kind of start as much fresh again. And also what you could do is you could add like a little, one or two slices of apple skin to it, and just kind of, because apple skins, again, unless they have been heavily treated with like some pesticides or some spray, or have been sprayed heavily, they have a lot of wild yeasts on them. So do grapes, so do raisins. So if you can also just throw 1 or 2 raisins in there. You know, they unless they're like really heavily treated, they have a lot of wild yeasts on them, and that will boost your starter. So you could always add that. And you just leave your starter out there, and you just kind of do the same thing every day or 2, depending on how warm it is. Now in the summer, you might want to do it like every other day or so, and you just add some flour and water. You basically discard about half of it, and then you add the amount that you were taking off, you add that back in. So if you're discarding, say like now we have about 300 grams of starter in here, I would take then a little bit out 2 days later, maybe half of it. You could scale that out too, but you can eyeball it too. I just use that here to eyeball it, and I'll take that out. Again, this one here is not a culture yet, but you can absolutely use it as you would use flour, like in your pancakes or in your other things that you're making. And with this one, I'm just basically replenishing what was missing. So in this case, I'm using about, like 50 or so grams, 50, 60 grams of flour and water, and add it back in. So you can do this for about a week, and you should see some activity happening after about 5 to 7 days. Again, if you don't see any activity happening, like you don't see any fermentation bubbles, you don't smell anything, I would really check again, maybe if you used a really good flour, or just maybe start again with freshly milled flour. So once that has a good activity going, it should somewhat look like this. So at the end of the week, you should have some activity going. You should smell it, and it should smell sweet, pleasant, and it shouldn't smell off. It should smell really nice. It shouldn't smell like nail polish or anything weird. So if that's the case, maybe start again. Because again, this is a spontaneous fermentation, so you just don't know what basically bacteria, microorganisms, yeasts, they all colonizing your flour here, and you just kind of wait and see. But you can tell best at the end of the week by looking at the activity, smelling it. This is going to be really important. And if that all seems really nice, if you don't see any mold, any like weird green, reddish kind of colors in there, I would taste it. Should taste pleasant. Should taste like slightly sweet, grainy, maybe a little bit sour. And from that point on, if that's all successful, congratulations, you've made it. You have a starter, and you started from scratch. The really great thing about it is it's your very own starter culture that is made in your environment, in your house. It picked up all the activity, all the microorganisms, what you have. So you have a very unique starter culture going. So good luck with that, and try it out.